Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Meet the Breeder today. We have Jessica Wilbur joining us from Sky Paint Homestead in North Carolina. Welcome,
Yep.
Jessica. Hi. So like we always do, we kind of start with the basics. So if you want to introduce yourself and just talk through your herd a little bit.
We knew we wanted dairy, but I had young kids and I needed my human children to be able to handle my goat kids fairly easily, and not just the kids, but also the adults. My daughter was in 4-H and she wanted something that she could show, and she was intimidated by the larger breeds. And so after looking into the Nigerians and deciding that the milk sounded like it was what we wanted, with the higher butter fat and really relatively high production for the size of animal that they are, we jumped in with Nigerians. And also knowing that there's a really high market for both genders, I knew that if I had gotten into Nubians or Alpines or whatever, that I was worried about being stuck with a whole bunch of buck kids. So I didn't want to have something that would be a devastating year if it was just a whole bunch of buck kids. So I have had great success with being able to sell my kids in a pretty timely way. And my refrigerator is pretty much always full of milk, and it's fabulous. We love our little goats. So
how many years have you been raising Nigerians?
I have been raising them since 2013.
Okay. And when you first started shopping for Nigerian dwarfs, how did that go?
Well, lots and lots of research. It was actually my husband that decided the first goats that we were going to buy. And I just went with it because I was just excited to have some fresh dairy on our farm. And it wasn't until probably the second year into it that I really started researching genetics and the direction that I wanted my herd to go, and also researching breeders that were outside of my state that I was willing to either travel there or pay for transportation to bring goats to myself. And that's where I am now. So I started not knowing a ton, and then getting into it, then learning about the genetic aspect of things. And so, yeah, I guess like the rest is history.
So which performance programs do you participate in, if any?
All of them.
Okay.
I'm an ADGA Plus herd, so I do DNA testing, linear appraisal. My herd is on milk test. We show whenever we can. I don't know if I necessarily consider that a performance program, because it really is subject to the goats that show up that day, not necessarily some of the goats that are the most true to standard, but we do show when we can.
And your daughter shows in 4-H as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, she did. We haven't, since we moved here to North Carolina, we haven't found a great dairy goat 4-H club. They're all dairy cow clubs, and it's very different. And there are some sheep clubs, but it's just not the same. So maybe next year we may look into starting our own, but we'll see.
Okay. One thing that I like to ask when we're talking to herds in different parts of the country is about your feed program, and also about your parasite issues, because it varies so greatly based on what part of the country you're in. Would you mind talking a little bit about your feed and your parasite issues?
I make my own mix of grain. I don't buy just commercially made grain. And only my milking does get that on the milk stand. And I do offer some hay, just an orchard grass mix hay for supplementing in the wintertime. And I do have I have a great source for a really high quality alfalfa supplement my lactating animals with. But then I utilize electric netting, and I have a 10-acre lot that's almost totally open, aside from some brushy blackberry areas. And I will fence off certain sections and move my goats every week, so that I've been able to manage parasites very well that way. I have only had to, I think I only have one goat that I've had to worm more than once a year, but for a herd of 15 plus animals, the number constantly changes. But for a herd of 15 plus animals, it's pretty standard that I deworm maybe once a year. And that's most of the time is only because of maybe my numbers are getting upwards of 650 eggs per gram, which is still within the safe zone, but I just don't want it to bloom and then get out of control. So, and then I have one of my bucks, my nicest bucks, where let's see, I think I've wormed him a total of 3 times in the almost 6 years that I've owned him. So I've been able to maintain parasites here. And in Western North Carolina, it's super wet and the seasons are very mild. And so goats die here of parasites. So you have to be really careful and monitor very carefully. And I monitor my herd not only by using rotational grazing, but also I bought my own microscope and I do all my own fecals on a really regular basis. I don't worm anybody that really doesn't need it. And even then, I've had goats that I really didn't necessarily have to deworm, but again, because we were coming up on a season of high stress or a particularly wet season, that if their numbers were starting to get up there, then I just went ahead and wormed them. But aside from that, I've been able to manage our parasite counts with rotational grazing.
Is the breeding for parasite resistance something that you just personally feel is important for your area, or is it a necessity for everyone in your area?
Well, I mean, in my opinion, it's a necessity, but not everybody thinks about it that way. I started my herd in Virginia where the parasites are not quite as bad there. There have been things that I've seen here that I've never seen before and that I've never had a problem with before. And I wouldn't say I necessarily have had a problem here, but I've just seen certain parasites that I had not seen before. So anyway, because the chemical resistant parasite numbers are continuing to climb really across species, but especially with goats, it seems that I did feel that it was really important to do my part for the breed, to not only breed animals that were conforming to the standard and also producing more than average, but also animals that could live a more hardy life. It would prolong their life. It would increase reproductive, health and all those things. It all ties into the hardiness of the animal. And I didn't want to have to keep dumping money and chemicals and having to feed copious amounts of feed to keep condition on an animal that did not have an immune system that could handle a parasite load. So for me personally, yes, it is really important, and especially important because of where I live. And I think also it's important because, again, goats die here of parasites, and it's not just Western North Carolina, but there are lots of areas in the states where parasites are a major issue.
Which parasites specifically have been the most problematic? And do you choose to do any preventative maintenance besides rotational grazing and things like that, like a chemical?
I only treat as needed. I do offer, when I remember, I do offer an herbal support for the immune system, but I have seen mostly barber poleworm is what I have seen here that I didn't really have when I lived in the area that I lived in Virginia. And then I do know of other herds that have lost goats to barber poleworm here in Western North Carolina. So that's a big one. And I mean, there's always coccidia. I haven't dealt with it yet this kidding season, and all my kids were born starting early February. And so I kind of expected to see something by now, but everybody has coccidia. That's not something that is new, but I would say that the barber poleworms are much more prevalent here than they were where I used to live.
So when you're looking at keeper kids, are you number one going for those hardy kids out of dams that have shown parasite resistance, or what are you looking for to either bring into your herd or improve in your herd this year?
So what I look for in my keeper kids is I've kind of gotten to a point where you just have a feeling about some over others, but something that I always look at, and I really feel like it's some of the only things you can actually see in a goat kid, is I will I pick them up. I want to feel a decent chest in the palm of my hand. And I mean, this is like within hours of birth. And I want to see those wide open nostrils. I want to feel a good spring of rib. I like to see length of body, you know, all those things that those don't usually change that much as the kid progresses. So a long bodied kid is most likely not going to become this short, stubby, tree trunk sort of goat. As of right now, all of the does that I have are all very hardy and, again, very parasite resistant goats. And so I feel really comfortable, and not just my does, but also my bucks. And so I feel really comfortable with keeping kids out of these goats. I don't feel like I'm gonna go, oh, well, this one isn't quite as thrifty, or maybe this one inherited something. But I've gotten to a point where I have enough generations now that I have seen the trend of who throws those really nice hardy kids that just have those naturally strong immune systems. And so I've gotten to a great place there. But what I would like to improve in my herd, when I'm looking for improvements, I'm looking for bucks, and I love bucks. I would probably have a herd of 10 if my husband was more tolerant. I only have 3 right now, but always looking for more. When I'm looking for improvements, and what I specifically would like to see is I would like to add stronger front end assemblies. I feel like that's something really, really difficult to get. I want more extension of brisket overall in my herd. And let's see. And I always look for genetics that line up with what I have in terms of, again, parasite resistance and overall thriftiness. And always looking for a good udder buck too, to put some better medials on my does.
Going into hopefully a show season, maybe a linear appraisal season.
These.
Yeah, right. What are you most excited about?
I love milk testing. That will never change. But honestly, what I get most excited about every year is linear appraisal, because I feel like I get the most accurate information, that it isn't just judging my goats based upon what goats have shown up that day. And there is something to be said about a goat that consistently places. It doesn't matter who they show under, but consistently places well. And I do have most of my goats, when I've shown them, I'm showing against some really, really nice herds. So when I go to shows, which is still, it's pretty sporadic, but when I do, I don't go expecting or even hoping to bring anything home aside from my goats, I mean, in terms of ribbons. But I look at other herds and I want to see what they have that I don't have. And that's what led me to Cedar View Farm, because I've shown against them, and good luck to anybody that shows against that herd, because Deb just cleans up all the shows and all of the rings. Her goats are always on the top. And so anyway, it led me to Cedar View, and in looking for improvements, like what we talked about before, that's what led me to her herd and saying, okay, she has something that I want. And it's not because I want to win shows. It's because I want goats that that have proven themselves in ring after ring after ring, that they are some of the top animals that have shown up that day. And so that's where I got my Cedar View buck, my prize, probably most expensive buck. And I hope to get another one from you, Deb. Don't forget me. Anyway, but linear appraisal, back to that, I like my does and my bucks being scored according to the standard and where they rank. And I mean, I've shown against goats that later, and I thought, oh my gosh, is this barn blindness, what am I missing here? And I have looked up data and how my does had out milked and outscored these does according to milk test and linear appraisal, when my doe took last place, and these other does were taken first. And so that's what first made me think, okay, what do I want to put my focus on? So I would say what gets me most excited for sure is linear appraisal first, milk testing second, and I just want to enjoy my goats third. And then fourth would be getting in the show ring and really seeing where, okay, if last year we placed sixth and fifth consistently, then this year, what if we place third and fourth? Just to see how we measure up to the other goats in our area.
One thing that I found interesting as we've done more showing, maybe you have a decent goat, but you don't really know how to show them off properly,
Mm-hmm.
or they're not trained properly, or they don't walk nice, or those things I think people don't understand play just as much of a part, the showmanship aspect of it, properly grooming them, properly uttering your animal up. And so there are a lot of variables when you go to a show. I like solid data, and I like to see those milk test numbers. I like to talk to that appraiser one-on-one about that animal. So for me, showing's a lot of fun. It's a social thing. And I'm like you, I just kind of like to see what's out there and see, so, well, that goat is a much wider rear udder than my whole herd does, or whatever. And for me, that's kind of the learning. It isn't, I can beat that goat. It's, well, in general, in our area, I'm coming up really short in this area where I'm not, or there are goats out there with rumps 2 inches wider than mine, or whatever it may be. And maybe you wouldn't have to go real far to find those genetics. There's only so many grand champions that can get one in a weekend. So
right.
I sure hope you're getting more out of it than just a ribbon.
Yes,
that's my advice to people.
And it's great for kids too, because it's fun to do something different. Get up early in the morning and drive somewhere, and first thing, which it's stressful for me to make sure I'm there on time, but going into it just saying, hey, we're going to have a good time, we're going to meet other breeders, we're going to see other goats, and we're just going to have a good time. So being able to compare your animals to other people's animals, it really helps you see what you have and what you don't have, and what you need to be looking for. And that also, with linear appraisal, I've always had the blessing of being able to do that with more than one other herd. And so I was supposed to be hosting. I did host one linear appraisal, and then I was going to host for 2020, but then, that was all canceled. And I hope, American Dairy Goat Association, that I can be hosting for 2021. But I love being able to put my goats side by side with other people's, because it shows me what their strengths and weaknesses are, and that what these, and I'm a visual learner. So it also helps me to really understand the different parts of the goat, and again, just the parts that I'm missing and the parts that I have.
What are some words of wisdom you can give to people who are maybe already into goats, but not taking it quite to the level you are? Would you encourage them to start with linear appraisal or milk testing, or what direction do you feel you've experienced the most growth with your herd?
I would say that my best advice would be, and this is what I tell people a lot of new people come to me and I say, research the genetics, look up the different herds and different lines. Don't limit yourself to what is within immediate driving distance, but consider taking a road trip to go visit other farms. If they'll do that, go visit other farms and see what they have. And again, just like was showing, put faces to names. And so learning the genetics is really important, and it's a lot to take in, but then finding a good mentor, someone that's willing to help walk you through it and help you put all the pieces together, and then buying the very best that you can afford. It's an investment, and it takes a couple years, but you will wind up being paid back for what you've put into your herd. And so whether that's being, sure, you can go on Craigslist and find $125 goats that are probably even registered, but there's a reason that those goats are priced at that price. And so what you trade for that sometimes is the quality, and which, I mean, sure, you can find a diamond in the rough, but for the most part, you're going to be sacrificing quality. So decide what a realistic budget is, research those genetics, talk to breeders, see if breeders will let you come just visit. That's what I did. We went and visited another breeder, and I just fell in love with those goats after meeting them. But just buy the very best stock that you can afford. And your goals, you have to have set goals and write them down. And it's okay if those goals change later, but if your goal is showing, then pursue a show herd. If your goal is production, then produce a production herd. If you want both, then there are herds that can do both. And I have some references if people are interested, of people that have both and have proven themselves. And but yeah, just decide your goals, come up with a realistic budget that fits those goals, and buy the very best that you can afford and start out with.
Agree. And the other thing that I think is very important is management. So if the herd is dam raising everything, but you want to pull babies and milk, you're going to get different numbers than they are. If their feed program is different than yours, if they, pamper their goats more or feed them premium products you're not willing to feed, and you expect your goats to live just on browse and no grain and milk like their herd, those are all questions that you need to ask, because if you have those high goals, but you're doing things very different from the herd that you're purchasing from, you're not going to get the same results. And and even with the parasite thing, that's we talked about this with one of our other breeders I interviewed. Maybe your herd's super parasite resistance for what you're dealing with in your area, but in another part of the country, you could bring a goat in and they might not, maybe that breeder's like, well, we have no parasite issues, so I don't even know what to tell you. We don't struggle with the same stuff that you do, so I don't know how my goat's going to hold up in your area. So those are all questions that if you're looking to bring something in, you're going to want to be asking. But if people want to,
I've had that happen too, where I brought in, so one of my favorite breeders is Lady Walker's Half Moon Farm. Hi, Lori. And that happened where I brought in, she's up in New Jersey and I'm in Western North Carolina. So the favorite buck that I own is from her. I bought him as a junior buck. He was my very first buck, and he has proven to be absolute gold, and I'm so grateful to have him. His nephew came up for sale, and I thought, well, gosh, if I can get him here, then I really want him, because I'm really happy with the boy that I have. And along with him, I brought in another buck from the same breeder. He was from a different line of genetics though, and he did not thrive in this environment at all. And it was very sad. I didn't even get to use him. I wound up losing him despite all my best efforts, and even the vets out here were totally stumped, but he just could not adjust to this area. And that was a really tough loss. That was my first real loss. But I've had that very thing happen, where the one that is related to my favorite buck, he's doing fabulous, and he has proven to be just as hardy as his uncle is. But this other buck from completely different genetics, that they are more a production herd. And I thought, oh, great, I'd love to up production, but you always sacrifice something. And so if these goats are pumping out the milk, I mean, we're talking 12, 13, 1,400 pounds of milk per year, they are most likely, like what you had said, living probably on a dry lot with a very controlled diet. So they just aren't exposed to the same things that these other goats are. And that's not true for every goat that produces a ton of milk, but for this particular line of genetics, it definitely was. And I confirmed that by talking to other people that owned goats from that same sort of line, that yes, the production is way up there, but they just don't really handle the a big change in their environment. So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to get that.
That's exactly. I love that you actually had that kind of antidote, because it's come up a couple times in these videos, and now it's a perfect example of kind of how not every goat's going to jive in every herd. It just doesn't work that way. So if people would like to learn more about your herd or talk to you about kids or reservations or anything, what's the best way to reach out to you guys?
So I just redesigned a website that took me probably 145,000 hours to do. So please go visit it. It's www.skypainthomestead.com. And there is a contact me tab on there with my email address, which is skypainthomestead@gmail.com. And this has been a really amazing year, actually, where all of my kids that have been born have sold within hours of birth. And so I don't have anything available right now, but I'm happy to take names for next year if you're interested in any of my pairings.
Are you done kidding for this year then?
No, I have one other doe who took forever to settle this year, which is also I've heard that across the board. There's just been some crazy things happening with people. And one of them is does that normally settle right away are taking a while. But anyway, so it wasn't my plan, but she's due in June. I like to have all my kids in February, but she's due in June. And then I have another potential doe that won't be due. If she's settled, she won't be due until July sometime, but she's not far enough along yet for me to confirm that.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate all the insight you provided, and have a wonderful day.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.